It's a new era with Tim Kask taking the reins at the Strategic Review. This is a fantastic issue with new monsters, new magic items, an article by Dave Arneson, and Gary Gygax recounts a battle between fantasy forces and Nazi soldiers. All that and a whole bunch more. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Today's video continues our look at the Strategic Review, TSR's fanzine / newsletter they put out in the mid-70s. Today's issue, number 5, comes to us from December of 1975. Hope you enjoy the video. So the Strategic Review number 5 is a fantastic issue. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. It's the glossy paper we're used to. This one's just black and white. It has all kinds of neat stuff in it. As I mentioned, the article by Arneson and Gygax. We've got art by Dave Sutherland and Greg Bell. And you can start to see the influence of having Tim Kask around right away. Here's our cover art. Really cool art. This is Greg Bell. So if you know something about Greg Bell's history of art, he sometimes did his own art freehand, and sometimes he went to Marvel Comics and generously borrowed images he found there. And you can usually tell, once you know that, which is which. And you'll see that in a minute when we look at some of the interior art. I'm going to say I think this art probably is draws on some Marvel comic art. Yeah, I think it's really cool. You've got this wizard, his hands are up. He's casted some kind of crazy spell. It's just a really, really neat piece of cover art. And you can see why the folks at TSR didn't know anything about where he was getting some of his inspiration. Saw this kind of stuff and like, oh, this kid, he was really young too. I think he's a teenager. We want him to stick around. As you'll see here, the announcement, what's inside, we have a recounting of the Battle of the Nile, some information on Tractics, and I think it's Sturmgutsch. I'm mispronouncing that. I don't know German very well. And sorcery. That's our battle against the Nazis. As you can see right away, look at the table of contents, right? A lot sort of longer than what we've had before. The Cauldron, which is Tim Kask's name for his editorial, right? And you'll notice that it carries over into Dragon Magazine. Tim had liked to have he didn't just call it the editorial, right? Sturmgutsch and sorcery is his two things, and we'll talk about it. He recounts sort of the battle that they ran on his table and the stats he used, as well as his philosophy of how you could do that kind of crossover between eras. Mapping the Dungeon, which is some information about things that are coming up. Mighty Magic Miscellany, which is new magic items. Some information about the wargaming hobby. The Battle of the Nile, which is a narrative replay of a historical battle. The Armory. Gallery of Gunfighters. We've got another historical gunfighter Brian Blume wants to tell us about for Boot Hill. A little information about the upcoming GenCon 9, the National Wargame Convention, which is a discussion about GenCon versus Origins, and you see right away the seeds of a little bit of a, let's call it a good rivalry that had developed between them right from the start. Creature feature, new monsters, and finally a little information about the Strategists Club. Who's participating? We got Tim Kask, Dave Arneson, Gary, Brian Blume, Mike Reese, Steve Marsh, then Greg Bell, Dave Sutherland, John Seaton, and J. Hayes contribute some art. Here's our cover, and here we have the editorial from Tim Kask. He calls it In the Cauldron, and so he's going to tell you some information about things that are that are coming up. The first thing he comes with right out of the gate is an apology that Blackmore is still not out. They had announced it. I take it from comments he's made. Some people have even sent in their money to sort of almost pre-order this, or I think people fairly understood it. It was already ready, and it's been delayed. He talks a little bit about the reasons for that. Throws some people under the bus. I think, right? But I think it took a while, and then the people that were supposed to get the prints back from the printer, that was really late. But all in all, he says, we are going to get it out sometime soon. And the other thing, I guess, is they've got problems with the mailing list for the Strategic Review. And he said it was such bad shape that they basically didn't cancel anyone's subscription, whether they thought they were supposed to or not, because they just weren't sure. So growing pains, right? And he talks about that. And so it's a sign of how quickly they're growing from just being a little hobby and a set of rules that Gary was putting out on behalf of the company to now this is like a real business. And, they've hired employees. And like I said, the numbers are growing sort of very rapidly. And you can sense that. But what an exciting time it would have been to be there and be part of that. And, of course, Tim Kask is still around, and he's got a very regular YouTube channel called Curmudgeon in the Cellar. I'll put a link to that in my video comments. And he talks about, both historical questions about things back in the day as well as sort of just his gaming philosophy. He'll really answer just about any question you want to ask him on that channel if you want to go watch his videos and send in some questions. Some more growing pains. They said they're actually losing money on Canada and overseas, and they're going to have to increase what they're going to charge there, so at least they're not losing money. They're going to open the Dungeon Hobby Shop, which is a storefront, brick and mortar storefront where they're going to sell games. Becomes a very iconic, part of TSR's history, the Dungeon Hobby Shop. They have a catalog they're going to put out of products, and they've had this really interesting idea where when they produce new things, if you buy a new catalog, you would get everything. But if you already have a catalog, it's going to be designed in a way that just everything new is a new insert. Like I guess it keeps adding to the middle pages or something, maybe the last pages, I'm not sure. But what he says is basically if you purchase the catalog, when we put out a new version, we'll send you the new pages and you can just sort of slide them in and grow your catalog. I don't know that ever happened, but it was kind of an interesting idea. He mentions this guy, I guess his name is Jim Hayes, has given them an oil painting that they now have in the office. So that'd be an interesting thing. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone talk about that before. I've never heard of Jim Hayes as an artist either. Tim's asked for people who have art to please send it in because they're eager to start building up he later calls it a slush pile of art that they can use with their games. And now some upcoming stuff. And some of this stuff I think never happens, but it's interesting to hear about. So Empire of the Petal Throne fans, we have a board game that'll be played on the maps you got with your EPT box set. Counters ranging from strategic to tactical units. There'll be miniature rules for EPT, and that did happen. I think I have a copy of that. The miniature production for Empire of the Petal Throne has almost been decided. They're down to 2 companies, and they're going to pick one. And they're going to have a board game like Dungeon, they said, that'll be EPT themed. And it will be different, but it'll be similar to Dungeon. I don't think that ever happened. Fight in the Skies is going to come out, and that, of course, does. Brian Blume's working on a new redesign of Gary's game on the Battle of Little Bighorn. Rob Kuntz is working on Lankmar game, inspired by the novels of Fritz Lieber, and that, of course, does happen. And Terry Kuntz is working on something called Robin Hood, and I've never heard of that game actually being produced. They said they tested it at GenCon, and then they were working to finalize it, but I don't think that gets published. Probably a trademark IP issue. And Gary's working on Classic Warfare, and I'm pretty sure that comes out. Oh, and they also mentioned that there might be another supplement called Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, which, of course, does happen, but not until after Eldritch Wizardry. And they also mentioned here again that the same thing as last time about maybe they're going to do a book where the content is just from submissions. And they said they're getting all these submissions, more than they can get into the strategic review. And they think maybe we'll do a booklet and publish those to share with the community. It's a early philosophy of theirs to do that. And at some point, it seems like the philosophy changes where, all the stuff that you and I might have wanted to make up in our home campaign, our ideas, there's a kind of a hard line driven between what's official TSR stuff and then the, home invented stuff. And TSR becomes, I think, less inclined to promote that or bless that in any way. Not that they're against it, right? But that they aren't the way that information is coming out. Although I guess, maybe Dragon Magazine is what ultimately fulfills that role of other ideas. And then he provides some information about different people at the company. And so you've got Gary Gygax, Brian Blume, Rob Kuntz, Theron. Oh, I guess that's Kuntz is Rob's brother, and Tim Kask. And they just give you a little bio about each of them. All right, so this is a really cool article that Gary did, and listen to what he says here. So he has he talks about D&D, and then he talks about the ways you can make a really interesting. You can use those rules to play other interesting games at your house. And so here's what he did. So he had one person, if I understand it correctly, he had one person who was going to play, and they both thought they were going to play a war game. And so the first guy, he's going to be in charge of some German troops. And he tells them about his German troops, and he says there's been unusual resistance activity in the recent days, and a squad of security troops were completely wiped out in the battle. And when you go and find your units destroyed, you find one old man, bearded, no weapons, at the scene. From his dress, it looks like maybe he was a Russian clergyman, right? Because he's wearing robes, like he's a magic user. And maybe he was there to incite the troops to bravery. You know, they don't pick up on the fact, I guess, that there are no other enemy troops to be seen. And so he tells them, look, you're going to have your soldiers, and you're going to have to march north and try to find their camp and wipe these guys out. All right, so then on the other side, you got this evil high priest, and he says your lieutenants, or warlock, and Lamagutsk, I think he's an orc, have not returned from the recent exploration of a nearby area west of your castle. And this thick fog has come up that obscures your vision, and you can't dispel it, with a dispel magic spell. So you've had some people trying to investigate and see whether some lawful forces are trying to come in and find you. Your strongest fighters are away putting down some kind of an uprising, so you have a small troop on hand, and you have to decide what to do. And basically you hear some growling sounds, some things that sound like clanking of chains, and some very loud humming. You can't tell what it is. That's just what a orc came back and reported to you. And you've got to decide what to do. You could try to hole up in your castle and protect it. But then, you might be overrun because you don't have any forces there. Or you could try to go away from the castle, and sort of find somebody in an advantageous location and, attack them by surprise. And so he says right at dawn, the players on each side would give him written instructions of what they were going to do because they couldn't see each other yet. He let them do that, and the Germans went into the fog to try and investigate, and the fantasy guys also decided to go into the fog and look around. And long story short, some of the orcs attacked them, and they learned what modern firearms could do, which was cut them in half. And there was a couple of magic users that were involved. Cast a sleep spell, knocked out a driver. There's a giant scorpion that came in and attacked, a troll, some ghouls that jumped up into the vehicle, and it goes back and forth. But long story short, the magic user who could fly eventually got up over top of them and apparently had several sleep spells, put a number of the soldiers to sleep. And ultimately, the fantasy guys won, and what little German forces were left, were trying to run away. So I thought it was really cool. He has a couple of things in here. So here's his chart of weapon damage for different types of guns that he would use. He also has rate of fire rules. Rate of fire rules in here. Short, medium, long range weapon or categories for his weapons, which is really neat. And so this is very early D&D, this idea you can cross it over with sci-fi, you could cross it over with other eras, and just sort of be, I'll say, a little gonzo with this kind of stuff. It seems like really fun, and I think obviously no one wants to have their whole campaign be around that kind of stuff, right? But for a one evening session, just something fun to do. It seemed like a really creative idea, and he reports that his players had a great time. At the bottom of the page, as last time, there's these little teasers. The dragon approaches. You can see its snout and its tongue sticking up there. So here's the map that he had, and he said on the left, here's what he gave to the German soldiers. In the middle, here's what he gave to the fantasy guys, and on the right is his map. So his map is accurate, and the other maps have mistakes in them to represent the kind of mistakes you have in your intelligence or the incomplete information you have in your intelligence. I thought that was kind of neat. And then here, Greg Bell has some art. And as I mentioned, I think in particular, if you look down here at his bottom left, that's a ghoul. I recognize because that's the same drawing he uses in the box set. And the soldiers here. I mean, I think that's what Greg's art looks like when he's drawing completely freehand, which is pretty different from the quality of the art that's on the cover. And then there's just a random piece of art in here from Dave Sutherland, pretty famous drawing. I think there's 2 or 3 different versions of this you'll see in the books over time, but very similar, right? Attack of the Sturges. I like this version the best because I think I like the, I don't know if that's a fountain in the back there with that demonic looking head that's mounted on a column, wall, or whatever, or what, but I think it's pretty cool. All right, then we have an article called Mapping the Dungeon. This is, again, Tim Kask's writing. Remember, this is from December. And they have a great holiday deal. And so they're selling books 1 and 2 of the 3 books that were in the wood grain box for only $4, $2 a piece. And he says those are the 2 books everybody used a lot, and so they probably get worn out, and so you could pick up a couple of these. That's an interesting thing. If you think about that, if you've purchased a box set and the books don't look like they match, well, maybe somebody took advantage of this offer and tossed out the original books they had because they were worn out when they got this offer and replaced them with the reprints. Clearly the kind of thing someone would do. Back in the time, nobody was trying to make sure they preserved a perfectly pristine original box, right? They just wanted books they could use that hadn't fallen apart yet. So there's a guy named Walter Buchanan, says he's starting a D&D section in the Diplomacy Archives, and he wants copies of any D&D related designs. As a guy who loves fanzines, I would love to be able to track him down or track down his work and find out what list he had and see if there's something I'm missing I don't know about there on his list. But in any event, that was kind of cool. GenCon 9, they mentioned this a couple times. There's going to be a D&D Dungeon Master session with Gary and Dave and Rob Kuntz are going to talk to upcoming or interested Dungeon Masters. Like he said, come ask all your questions. And again, we want to know what you, the readers, are interested in so that we can make appropriate direction in the future of D&D. And he talks about all the supplements they're getting. They have a list of Dungeon Masters here, and there's some interesting people on there. Obviously, Tim Kask is there. Mark Swanson, who starts the Wild Hunt fanzine over in Boston. And Jim Ward is on here. And then there's a University of Colorado Strategic Game Society and Valparaiso University D&D Society and a MIT SGS, that's some kind of gaming group over in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So a few cool ones, and then obviously some other people, individual folks are on here as well. All right, so then we have our magic items, and there are 2 of them here. The robe of scintillating colors. Anyone can use this, it says. And when you sort of concentrate, once you've sort of synced up, and you have to have an intelligence plus wisdom of 25 together to do that. And once you sync up with it, it'll start scintillating these colors, and it'll lower by 1 your armor class or make it harder to hit you, maybe -1 on their dice roll, every round of combat. And so first round it's -1, second round it's -2, and so on. And then you can also do that outside of combat, but then it's by turn instead of by round. And anyone who's looking at you has a 5% chance of each round of becoming hypnotized, and again, that is also cumulative. So the longer combat goes on, sort of the better protection the person wearing it's going to have. It's funky here. I like it because anyone, if you have the intelligence plus wisdom, anyone can wear this thing. So I love the kind of the fighter with the sort of the crazy robe concept. And the second thing we have here are prayer beads. And this is a bead. There'll be 10 to 40 beads on here. 60% of them are just regular beads. But then others, you have a chance, 20 for the other 40%, for each of them you roll, a 20% chance they have some type of power. You roll an alignment, 75% lawful, 20 neutral, 5 chaotic, to see what alignment it is. If you're the wrong alignment, there's no damage for picking them up. You just can't do anything. All right, so you roll a 6-sided die to see if they do have power. Beads of atonement, 80% chance to atone for transgression and basically go back to your prior alignment if you had an alignment change, whether that was you did a bad act and so the the DM changed your alignment, or you had some magic item that changed your alignment, this bead of atonement could change you back and let you get back to your class 2, I think. Maybe not. I guess it's a DM ruling. It doesn't say that here. Bead of response, it makes your deity respond to you, although you may not like it because they may not like being forced to respond. Bead of damnation puts you in contact with your deity's most extreme enemy or nemesis. Bead of karma, cleric 1st to 5th level increases you by 3 levels for a few turns, and 6th to 10th 2 levels for a few turns, and 11th over 1 level for a few turns. The bead of succor increases the chance of response when you pray to your god by 30%, and the bead of hindrance decreases the chance of a response by 30%. I don't know how you're increasing, or well, I understand decreasing by 30%. I never give somebody anything close to more than maybe a 1 or 2% chance of getting the attention of their deity, but in any event, that's what the prayer beads will do for you. All right, the wargaming world, and so we've got some information about what's going on in wargaming. He talks about the Spartan group, which is an Ancients game. Avalon Hill picked up GDW's Eagles game, and now it's added to their Alexander inventory. There's a game called Ancient Conquests being put out by a company called Excalibur Games. And there's one called Winter War 3, and that's going to be an event at the campus of the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And they said there'll be a D&D tournament as part of that. I guess it's a convention. SPI has a fantasy game called Sorcerer, and of course they've heard of DunderCon. There's a little spat here about DunderCon. I've heard of this before. They mentioned Fritz Lieber's coming, and they said they're running his dungeon, but TSR got all touchy about that because they're putting out a product. And they say they reached out to Fritz Lieber, and he says no, there's nothing official of mine being run there. And so they say we hope no one's been sort of misled by this advertising. We don't want you to be disappointed. And by the way, don't be stealing our thunder, because Fritz Lieber is one of our special guests at GenCon this year, and it's a really big deal. So. They put that note in there. I do understand they smoothed that over with DunderCon folks, but in any event. So there's something that was going to be put out called Cymry, Cymry, and it was a magazine in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but it doesn't seem like it ever really came out. And with another announcement, Charles Pascoe still says someday he's going to put out something called Alicia, but that hasn't come out as well. Conflict Magazine has shut down. Okay. Then we've got this, support GenCon's bid to be DippyCon, so I guess it was going to be maybe a 2-part event if they could win the bid. All right, so now we have Dave Arneson's article, and he really liked naval battles. He helped Gary with the Don't Give Up the Ship, and he basically just gives you a little background and an account of the refighting of his home campaign group of this battle, and how it all turned out and why it turned out that way. He basically says the British guys weren't cooperating. They had 3 different guys in charge of their boats, and they all did different things, and basically did not attack in a coordinated way, and they got hammered. And so here's this guy, Seaton, who's got the 2 little sketch drawings, very frenetic drawing style. And we've got another reminder, beware the dragon, and now you can see a little bit more of its nose and its flames coming out here. Mike Reese has this article called The Armory and its modern weapon data for Tractics, and again, it's just got more different things that you can add in here to your campaign. Gallery of Gunfighters this time is on a guy called Ben Thompson, who was a gunslinger back in the Wild West, and it's got a little history about him and got his stats. Some information at the end here, the GenCon preview. They talk about it, just like GenCon 8 is over, and now we immediately pretty much have to start planning GenCon 9. At this point, they say it's going to stay in the Horticultural Hall, still in Lake Geneva at this point. They mentioned the seminar that Dave, Rob, and Gary are going to give on dungeon mastering. There's going to be a swords and sorcery seminar. Fritz Lieber's going to talk about that. And then they're going to have some games for Empire of the Petal Throne, and MAR Barker is going to be there for that as well. Tournaments, in particular, say we're giving attention to anything that sort of ran out of space and was overflown last year with people, overflowed last year in terms of applicants. So they'll try and do that. And they want you to know GenCon is still the #1 convention, so don't let those Origins people confuse you. Speaking of which, we have a whole article here. What is the National Wargame Convention? As they say, we're still friends with those guys, but we just want to set the record straight. There's been some propaganda out there, and we have a different view of that. Both, one, they say they're a national convention because they've had people from both coasts and a whole bunch of states come for a number of years. So, not that Origins isn't, but they are too, and they've been there longer, even with some folks overseas. And they said they point out that Avalon Hill had previously referred to GenCon as the premier American wargame convention. And so now they're just trying to say, look, we're big boys too, right? And we've got a big crowd. And so then we get into that, the numbers. They said Origins was well attended. They had 1,500 people, but FYI, we had 1,800 people. So we're a little bigger. Someday somebody else might be bigger, but for now, we're still the biggest one as well. So, a little competition's good. And just like other companies pushing them, it's good to see being pushed to have a really great convention, which is the way I take that. Okay, let's talk about our new monsters because those are super cool. We've got the Rakshasa, and here's the interesting thing, and the drawing that Trompier does of this, right, is that tiger, but I'm not sure where he got that. I'm not familiar with the lore, but this is something that comes from India, and they just describe it as an evil spirit encased in flesh. Loves to eat humans, masters of illusion, and they try to basically hang out, use their ESP until they can get somebody alone, then they can kill them and eat them. They do mention they have claws and teeth, but again, I'm not sure why they sort of think they look like a tiger smoking a pipe, but in any event, here we have our first appearance of that. Then here's one that I don't think we've ever used in my game. It's called the Slithering Tracker, and this is a great one. Maybe we used this when I was really young, we first started. A transparent, almost impossible to discover creature inhabits the dungeon or other dark places and normally does not attack immediately. It follows the victim to a place where they sleep, and then when they're asleep, they attack. And they can fit through cracks under a door, like they said, like a mouse hole or anything, because they have a semi-fluid body. They flow through the opening, and their attack is done with contact with exposed flesh, which you tend to have when you're asleep. And that will cause you to paralyze you unless you make your save versus paralyzation. And once you're paralyzed, they draw all the plasma out of your body in 6 turns. So, and this thing gets a hold of you. So there's only a 5% chance you'll see it if you're the guy on watch at night. This thing slithers in there and paralyzes you. You're in bad shape. It doesn't say anything about damage. So I don't know if you fail that. If you make your paralyzation saving throw, if now you're awake and something's trying to suck your plasma, I assume so, because that's got to hurt, right? But anyway, a super, super deadly creature. And speaking of deadly creatures, our third one here, another one, super famous, and this one I think I've seen in the dungeon lots of times, and that's the Trapper, right? So the Trapper is a creature, amorphous, has a hard skin. It sort of looks like it could be stone, so it can blend into a dungeon floor. And it basically has got a great big, 400 square foot body, and usually has some kind of protuberance that kind of looks like a chest sticking up in the middle. And when the guy or gal comes in to touch that chest, it just rolls up around you, right? And you're stuck and you can't attack. So now it's up to your party members to get you out. It has 12 hit dice, which is a lot. It does 4 points of damage plus your armor class. So if your armor class was 10, that's 14. If it was 5, it's 9, whatever. Every turn, I think it's got to be every melee round, because if it's really a turn, right, that'd be 10 rounds. I mean, now your party's got a ton of time to attack you before you're killed. When we do it, it's every round you take damage until you get crushed. So it's sort of a race against time. Your party's got to try and kill this thing, which has armor class of 3 because it's so tough, before you suffocate. Super cool monster. So all 3 of these super cool monsters. Some blurbs here at the end. The Strategists Club time to do the awards for next year. Best game, best designer, best writer, 1975. Discount coupon here for on Tractics or Panzer Warfare, or Don't Give Up the Ship, a little discount of $1 there. And this company, Taurus Limited, says May 24th, 1941, a black monster loomed out of the fog. It was the Bismarck, the biggest battleship in the world. In 2 minutes, the massive, mighty battle cruiser hood was destroyed with one broadside. So now they have to proudly present you a conflict simulation game called Raiders of the North. Just an advertisement. And here we have a little art from this guy, J. Hayes. What do you mean my fireball only did 6 points of damage, says the wizard as the troll picks him up and gets ready to throttle him. And an announcement about next time. The Dungeon Hobby Shop is opening. And then in Strategic Review number 6, we're going to have an essay on Law, Chaos, and Good Evil. This is where Gary begins to expand alignment. New variant characters to use with your dungeon board game. In Search of the Missing Tome, an S&S adventure by Rob Kuntz, and a new character class, The Bard, by Doug Schwegman. Really cool stuff coming up. Advertising, typical stuff that TSR has for sale, which is both its own items and then some items from other people that they're selling as well. The Strategic Review number 5, the first one with Tim Kask at the helm. Really, really cool issue of the Strategic Review. We've got a couple more of these before they finally evolve over into being Dragon Magazine. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you're liking this series, and I hope you're subscribed. If you've got some friends who might enjoy our content, please send them our way. We'd love to have more subscribers. Have a great day, and until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.